I'm going to share something that I have never, ever shared before, and I'm really terrified about it. So I'm going to just perch here, and I'm going to refer heavily to my notes, and I'm going to ask you all to forgive me in advance. So on some level, I believe that our lives are defined by a series of conversations. The ones that we have, the ones we should have had, and the ones we never, ever could have imagined we would need to have. I had one of those conversations exactly 525 days ago on June 29th of 2017. And it was one of the most important conversations of my life. I was in the car with my man, Antonio, and we were driving home from Spalding Rehab Hospital, where I had just finished my first evaluation to see how I was doing after the 9.5-hour brain surgery I had had 8 days prior. And I was not doing well. 9.5 hours of brain surgery causes some pretty serious swelling. So technically, walking smack into the edge of a door the first time I got out of bed, or not just struggling, but being absolutely unable to answer when asked basic questions like, what day is it, or where are we, wasn't supposed to be alarming. My first walk had been with my man, around and around the floor where you go after brain surgery. I was physically so strong I could have walked for days. And although they'd said not to overexert, I kept finding excuses for us to keep going. Not because I wanted to show I could do it, but because I was trying to figure out how to read. Read the signs in the hall, on the doors to patients' rooms, at the nurse's station, and I couldn't. I knew they were supposed to be communicating something, but I had no idea what. The idea is, as the swelling goes down, ability goes back up. But as my surgeon had said to me with enormous clarity in one of our prep discussions, to get to the bad part of the brain, we've got to go through the good. And that was always the risk. I was terrified that in getting at the bad, we had hurt too much of the good. On this 8th day after surgery, I was beyond anxious. I had been discharged on day 3 much earlier than anyone expected because by hospital standards, I was doing so well. But by mine, not so much. We met with a speech therapist named Rachel. She was wonderful. And while I clearly wasn't all better, I also wasn't all bad. But next up was occupational therapy. In my mind, occupational therapy was just a fancy word for physical therapy, and physically I was great. So this just felt like a simple formality. I didn't start to panic until we walked into the OT room, which was huge, with patients all through it doing all sorts of things. And over in the corner, there was this large square table with 5 people seated around it. And they were all staring at me like an animal in the zoo. Because having my kind of surgery was pretty unusual. And they were curious. And it suddenly hit me, I am fascinating for a reason. And this might be about to go in a way that I am not expecting. The first task was to draw the face of a clock. My heart was all, we got this. But my mind didn't know what the face of a clock looked like. So the lead therapist leaned over and said, just draw a circle. Still blank. So she drew it for me, and everyone just stared. She put a 12 on it and said, can you put in the numbers? I put a sort of 1 where the 3 should be and something maybe like a 2 where the 6 goes, and then I stopped. And the woman, kindly now, with her hand on mine, said, you need to put in the 3 through 11 here. Pointing. I couldn't even begin to describe to you what I put in that circle except this. It was wrong, and I knew it. And now my heart was racing and I was flushed. The next exercise was to move marbles from one wooden box to another as quickly as I could. I bombed, and it only went downhill from there. I felt exposed and very, very, very alone. I'm not a big crier. In fact, I'd only cried a few times since getting diagnosed incidentally 6 years before. Incidentally, as many of you know, just means by accident, since I had no symptoms and got a CT scan only because there was worry I had a throat infection that would go to my brain. I would say I never cried because I didn't want anyone to worry, but I realize now it was also because I was terrified of being a burden, and I didn't want to feel weak. And I managed not to cry while we sat there in that room, but I wanted to. And when we got in the car, not only did I start crying, I ugly cried. I mean, body-racking, deep sobbing, unable to catch my breath, boogers everywhere crying. And when I finally could speak, I remember saying to Antonio, babe, what am I going to do? My brain is not working. How will I care for our family? How will I do my job? I love our life. What will I do? What will we do? And I have never loved my man so much as I did in that next moment, because he thought long and hard, and then he turned to me and said, well, then we'll get a farm. And I sat for a minute, I thought, a farm? I really like animals, and I really do like farms. And that little fire of hope reignited in my belly, and I turned right back to him with a big boogie smile and said, okay, we'll get a farm. By July 1st, I could write words again. By the third a sentence. Numbers and I were falling back in love by July 8th. And by the middle of July, I was cleared to get back to life. So instead of becoming a farmer, I went back to the work I'd been doing, and with the energy of a mad woman, so grateful to be alive, to have the opportunity to do more, to build on all my scars, the one on my head, yes, but also the ones that had come before. My brain tumor was benign, but my sister-in-law, Za, had not been so lucky. And in 2004, 7 months after she was diagnosed, she died of glioblastoma, or GBM, or motherfucking brain cancer, as we like to call it in my house. She had been 32. Her daughter, Eliza, not yet 3. Eliza is now one of the most beautiful 17-year-olds you will ever see. That experience and how suckily our country managed the end of life was imprinted on my soul, and the foundation for an effort called Engage with Grace we started in 2008, designed to help get people thinking and talking about how to live our very best days until our last. Thank you, Atul, for that language. In 2000, before Azad got sick, I had also started a company called Eliza. We were using this crazy cool technology to do something that no one had ever done before, using speech recognition to proactively reach out to people and engage them in a conversation about their health, with a goal of encouraging, supporting, and beguiling them into taking better care of themselves. Over the course of my time there, we did over 1 billion interactions. And the thing I learned more than anything else was that all these people we were trying to reach out and influence, they didn't care at all about the things we were trying to get them to talk about and take action on, things like their diabetes or their heart disease, because they didn't have that luxury, because their mother with Alzheimer's had just moved in, or their partner was cheating, or they hated their boss so much they couldn't breathe. So we started this movement called the Unmentionables, making the argument that the biggest diseases in the US were actually these life challenges. Things like caregiver stress, workplace stress, financial stress, relationship stress. And we set about finding a way to measure and impact these things that you could think of as life sucks disease. After Eliza was bought, Sarah and I, my co-founder in Archangels and Rebel Health, knew we had to focus on supporting caregivers. The 44 million Americans providing unpaid care for an adult or child who is ill or disabled. Many of us spending over 20 hours a week at this job. Many in the sandwich generation caring for aging adults and children at the same time. Caregivers are really, from our perspective, at the epicenter of this life sucks superstorm. So we started Archangels. Our initial attempts to identify, honor, and connect these caregivers to resources failed miserably and repeatedly, because caring for caregivers is hard. So I had a midlife crisis, came to the conclusion that I lived in a bubble, and in an effort to get out of that bubble, I went to work as a cashier at Walmart, where in very short order, I realized all those people I have spent a career trying to entice to come take care of their health in the traditional healthcare system. They might not be interacting with the medical world, but they sure as hell are coming through the lines at Walmart. In fact, 50% of the US goes through a Walmart every single week, and 95% go through at least once a year. And it hit me, retail is the front line of health. And we need to stop waiting for people to come to us and bring what we've got back out to them, where they are in the messy realities of their lives. And just like that, starting with Walmart store number 2660 in North Reading, Massachusetts, shout out to store 2660, Archangels was reborn. A few months ago, I had to get an MRI to check in on how I was doing. And for some reason, lying in that machine with Antonio waiting right in the MRI room with me, holding my leg again, missing work because of me again, bearing the brunt of my anxiety in the days leading up to this annual screening again, Realizing he was about to share the heart-stopping panic of waiting for the results again, it hit me. He is a hero. He is my caregiver. He is an archangel. And I know I've talked forever about how hard this job is. I even started a company around it. But there's something about lying in an MRI machine just over a year at a brain surgery where you also realize, wait a minute, if he's the caregiver, then I'm the patient. And while I am so deeply grateful for all this help, wow, do I feel guilty for needing it. And being a patient is just not how I see myself. It feels needy and dependent, like a burden. And there is an element of shame in that. And that's really the theme of all this work over the years, is to dig in especially hard on these harder bits, in these dark regions of our hearts and souls and minds where lives the part of us that feels shame. And I've seen over the years that where there is shame is usually just a conversation waiting to be had. And that the oxygen that fuels this dark, dark place is just our thinking that we are the only one. And we are never alone. Never, ever, ever. Our work with Archangels is off and running now, a movement to support and honor caregivers using retail as the front line of health. But changing culture is not a one-and-done thing. It's a process, one that happens in fits and starts, where we often learn more from what's not working than from what is. And we've started to explore if maybe part of what we're talking about is not just having the community honor the caregiver, but having the community honor the act of caring. So that in celebrating the caregiver, we aren't by accident denigrating or victimizing or pitying or making feel even more guilty the person that they're caring for. Just talking about the caregiver and not the person they're caring for is sort of the sound of one hand clapping. It might even inadvertently be pitching the two against each other. If the honoring of one does not inherently lift up and celebrate the other, then we introduce discord where most there needs to be harmony. When we name and work to address only the shame of the caregiver, maybe in the process we reinforce and drive even further the shame of needing care. How can we make that honor flow both ways? Would making the honor flow both ways create a harmony even just in naming it that was self-reinforcing? What if the Archangels movement included picking your caregiver, really your archangel, and asking them in advance? What we do now, sometimes at best, is appoint a power of attorney or a medical power of attorney. This is not just an act devoid of joy. It is highly technical, cold, and something we never talk about. But just because we don't talk about something doesn't mean it's not happening. Caregivers are becoming caregivers every moment of every day. There is just no celebration and no honor and no glory. One of the only positives we hear consistently from caregivers is that when given the chance to be seen, when acknowledged for the great honor of what they do, caregivers feel incredible purpose. And having purpose, as we heard earlier, is what makes for a good life. But it's hard to see the glory and feel purposeful in something invisible, in something that nobody ever talks about. And as important, until being a caregiver feels seen and honored, then being cared for is also going to feel like crap. Left hand, right hand. We bring enormous intention to asking someone to marry us, or asking someone to be a godparent to our beautiful new baby. Isn't this that important? Will you be by my side as I age? Will you care for me? Will you lie with me? Will you hold my hand when I am terrified? And in turn, because I know you will be as well, will you let me hold yours? Will you tell me in advance what will make this easiest for you? And what about it will be the hardest, but maybe the most important? My favorite line in When Breath Becomes Air is when Lucy is entreating Paul. Won't our having a baby together when we know you're dying hurt so much? And he says in his infinite wisdom, wouldn't it be great if it did? We're not here to take all the pain away from each other. That's not possible. We are here to support each other through it. And when you support me, you give me solace and comfort and love. And when I let you support me, I give you purpose, a role, a mechanism for channeling that love. Left hand, right hand. I have always been worried I will die young. And losing my sister-in-law to brain cancer at 32 and finding out 7 years later I had a brain tumor myself hasn't done a lot to quiet those gnawing fears. And as many of you know, and Jeremy said so beautifully, that conviction can actually be a tremendous gift, creating a ferocious, almost joyful urgency that spreads out into every corner of everything we're lucky enough to get to be able to do. 11 days ago, my man and I had another conversation. It was the Sunday night after Thanksgiving, and we were on a date, partially to reconnect after a crazy holiday, partially because the stress of this talk was making me a nightmare. Sorry, babe. And partially because on Thanksgiving morning, my cousin Court had died. He was 52, and he was a magical human, intentional beyond belief. He went out for a quick run before everyone arrived for dinner, and he suffered a massive heart attack. Sometimes you spend your whole life preparing for death, and you live to be 90. And sometimes you have no idea, and it happens with no warning at 52. All through dinner, I kept choking on the unexpectedness of losing Court, the unpredictability of life, the lack of permanence, my own fears, my kids, my man, for all those one holds dear. Until at one point, Antonio put his hand on mine and said, "Babe, we're okay. You're okay. All your tests are good. We're fine." And I said, "I know, but one day I may not be. And then what will we do?" And he turned to me, and he took both my hands in his, and he looked straight into my eyes, and he said, "Then I will be your archangel, and we will get a farm." We all have an archangel in waiting. We just need to have this conversation so that when our time comes, whatever our farm is, it will be waiting for us. Thank you.